On the sand, a straw hat with blood lay face down. A girl with swollen feet gripped a worn knife. The man with a dented canteen walked away, back straight as if owing nothing to earth or sky. I pulled my horse to a stop. From the moment the canteen was hung on the old nail, everything shifted. Here, the sound of a clink knew how to tell the truth. The straw hat, half its brim torn, lay face down on the sand. The straw was frayed, strands split apart like fish bones. Along the brim, a streak of dried blood had darkened, cracked into tiny lines like parched earth. I bent down. Sand slid into my ankle, burning hot. The air carried the acrid scent of thistle. A fine blonde hair was caught between two strands of straw, matted as if once wet, then dried too quickly. Beneath the crown of the hat there was a sign of violent motion. The sand was raked into a fan shape, its center pointing toward an open stretch without shade. On the sand's surface, small drag marks from a sandal. The grooves were shallow, long, broken. One section showed the sharp edge of a sole, another only faint scratches like fingernails. I followed them. That way led into land glazed by heat, flickering, trembling. My horse tossed its head. The reins scraped against its mane with a dry whisper. The saddle leather steamed up the smell of hide and old sweat. I placed a hand on the saddle to steady it. My palm touched a crust of salt dried on the edge of the leather. My tongue was as dry as if holding ashes. The hat lay face down, the torn brim covering part of it. I tilted it half an inch. A small spill of sand slid out. Beneath it was a circle flatter than the rest, as if lifted off a head and slammed back down in haste. Two ants crossed over. They veered away at the scent of blood. Beside the hat, a reversed heel print, the kind left by someone trying to turn back while being pulled. I looked closer. A fine trace of smooth sand clung to a strip of dark leather, maybe a belt or a bag strap. The mark dragged sideways, then vanished. She lay a few steps away. Her lips were white. A small patch of skin at the edge blistered, rough and puckered. Her eyes half open, the whites dulled from the sun. Wind, not leaves. Metal touching grains of sand. I stayed still, tilted my ear. The sound stopped. Only my heartbeat in my ears. The wind lifted the dust and let it fall. I looked back at the hat. The hair caught in the straw was short. The tip bent, as if pulled from the scalp when the hat was yanked away. I touched the streak of blood. It crumbled like powder. A speck clung to my knuckle, rough. I pressed a fingertip into the groove where the sandal mark was. The sand there was cooler than the rest. My palm felt a faint damp from my own shadow. On the fine surface, desert mouse tracks dashed and vanished into a round hole. The hole was an arm's length from the sandal mark. Between them lay a few black pellets like goat droppings. There was a steady thump, metal hitting human flesh with each step. I looked up. Farther off, a man was leaving. The dented brass canteen swung against his hip in rhythm. Each strike caught the sun for a flash, then went dark. The strap was dark brown leather. The cork plug sat loose. The cord binding the cork was frayed, unwinding. He walked neither fast nor slow, even steps, back straight, shoulders slightly raised against wind, but his body aimed straight down the road. His boot heels sank as deep as the toes. Men who walk like that rarely turn back. I watched to see if he would. He didn't. The wind moved. It sent sand in curving lines drifting over the last footprints. The front prints faded first. The back ones covered next. The older marks had already gone, leaving only darker edges in the hollows. I looked toward the end of the white bright road, saw nothing but the shimmer of air. She made the smallest move. Her pupils slid left, then held at the edge of sight, not touching me, not him. Her eyes fixed on the canteen striking his hip. Her lips parted. The tip of her tongue touched her dry teeth. No sound. I pulled the scarf at my neck up to cover my mouth. It tasted of salt, smelled of old wool. I swallowed. The sound of it in my throat was slow, like swallowing sand. My horse shook its mane. The bridle quivered. I placed my hand on its neck. The skin was hot, the pulse. The move was practiced. He didn't look down, didn't touch his shirt pocket, didn't touch anywhere else. Men before leaving usually pat what they carry. He didn't, as if he had already taken all he came for, as if nothing was left to remember. I crouched to where the red punctures showed clear at her ankle. A few black grains of dust clung there. I saw a thin, curved trace, like the drag of something no thicker than a finger. The mark broke at the edge of her shadow. That way thistles bent flat. Inside them a faint sound like grains brushing over scales. I stayed still. The sound stopped. The thistles stood again. She drew a shallow breath. Her shoulder moved. A strand of hair stuck to her temple trembled. On her forehead fresh sweat beaded. The droplet pushed a rim of dust into a gray line, ran past the corner of her eye, stopped at her cheekbone, and dried. She moved her lips, didn't call. I picked up the straw hat and turned it over. Inside was the smell of scalp. Some straw strands stuck with blood had been torn free, their tips blackened. Beneath the straw lining a shallow darkened dent, like a fingertip pressed there many times. I let the hat sit in my palm for a moment. The straw was hot. It sent its heat into my skin, burning like a coal gone to ember. I looked again at her foot. Dirty, short nails, cracked heel. The sandal print on the other side showed a size smaller than the sandal itself. She had likely been walking in a pair that didn't fit. The dragged groove ran from the hat to her body, then a few handspans in the opposite direction, and stopped, as if someone had gripped her ankle, pulled, then let go. Along his path, a torn piece of hemp rope clung to a low cactus, its end frayed. I stepped over, picked it up. The fibers were stiff, coarse, heavy with sweat. I held it in my palm, looked toward that straight back. He was now no bigger than my fingertip. The canteen still struck in rhythm. No call from him, no turning of the head. I lifted the rope to my nose. Salt metal tang, damp wood, and that distinct smell of old hemp, weathered through many seasons of rain and sun. At one end, a faint hers shortened by the width of a finger. The bloodstain on the hat didn't change. Bloodstains never do. Only the sand changes. The wind pulled away another thin layer. His footprints blurred to nothing. The glint on the canteen weakened, then was gone. Only the faint thock of its swing remained, now and then. I looked at the small rusted nail on my saddle, where I usually hung things. The rust was reddish-brown, the head flattened, its edge sharp. Nothing hung there today. The empty space looked like the mouth of a dry cup. I held the straw hat by 2 fingers, lifted it into the sun, then lowered it. The straw threw a patch of light onto her face, then shade again. She drew one more breath, very thin. Her throat trembled, without sound. I kept my distance. Far out, where the road met the sky, a short column of dust rose and vanished. Not a wagon, not cattle, only wind spilling over the lip of the land. Everything held still. The insect hum sank, then rose, needle stitching the air. I lowered the hat close to the ground, tapped one edge of the brim into the sand to bleed off the heat. Fine dust rose, clung to the rim. I turned the hat so the bloodstain faced the road, not as a signal, just so it looked toward where it had been taken. She watched the canteen swinging far off. Not the hat, not the knife. Her eyes followed that metal beat until there was nothing left to follow. Her lids dropped part way, then stopped. I heard her chest draw in one notch of air. The breath caught halfway, like thread snagged in a needle's eye. I stood still, back straight. The horse nosed at a patch of dead grass, chewed, then spat from the bitterness. Its tongue slid out, drew back. A strand of saliva stretched thin between its jaws, broke. The drop hit the sand and vanished without a trace. Beneath her hem, her foot curled slightly, then eased. Sand slid between her toes. The grains gathered between 2 knuckles. A slight shiver moved along her calf. The 2 punctures remained, the purple rim spread by the width of a grain. Sweat on her brow dried so quickly it left a salt line like chalk. Stare at nothing. She lay still, eyes half open, knife in hand. The sun slid by the thickness of a straw. No one spoke. No one called. I stood there, hearing the saddle leather cool, hearing the clockwork in my chest slow, and watching the sand do its work. The wind kept on. That was all. I led the horse closer. The reins were frayed, the hemp kinked where my hand often gripped. I looped them around a dry wooden stake jutting from the sand, pulled tight once, heard the fibers scrape. The knot I tied by habit sat snug like a joint. The horse snorted, sweat darkening the hair at the base of its mane. I set my hand on its neck, skin hot, pulse steady. Its shadow reached to her knee, stopped at the edge of the swollen calf. She glanced over, then down. Brief. A passing look like the prick of a needle. Her eyes went back, lids half closed against the glare. Her thumb pressed into the old crack on her knife's handle. The crack blackened, running the length of the wood like a dry bolt of lightning. That spot was glossier from sweat soaked in over and over. The skin of her thumb blanched under the pressure. The joint showed the tendon. I knelt on the right side of the bitten leg, said nothing. My hand touched sand first, feeling the fine grit rasp against my skin. I brushed the layer clinging to her with the back of my hand. Dust stuck to my arm hair. The 2 red marks swelled, the purple rim spreading by the width of a grain since before. I looked, then drew the small knife from my belt pouch. The blade was tarnished near the hilt, the edge tight, with a tiny chip like a broken tooth. I set the edge on her skin, cut a shallow line. The skin parted in silence, only heat rising, a faint smell of iron. She didn't cry out. Her foot jerked minutely, then held still. I bent close. Bitterness surged over my tongue, mixed with sand, with sunburnt skin, with the wood scent from her knife's handle nearby. I spat into the sand beside us. A small red stain spread, then sank. The wind stirred. Sand covered it as if nothing had happened. Her eyes short, as if testing a scent. I slid the knife into its sheath, heard the faint click at the wooden catch. I reached for the canteen at my hip. My fingers knew the path, found the cork. The cork was soft at the tip, stiff at the base. I pulled it free, the smell of old water and damp cork lifting thin into the air. She looked into it. Her gaze stopped moving. I tilted the canteen. The water came slow, each drop holding to the lip before falling into the air like stepping off a ledge. I didn't pour close. I let the drop fall to the edge of her cracked lip. It broke, softening a line no wider than a hair. She opened her mouth a slit. The next drop met her tongue. I held steady. The last drops refused to hurry. They took their own time. One fell, then the next held back as if someone paused to think. I turned my wrist a quarter. Another drop. Done. I gave the canteen a small shake. Nothing left inside but air moving along metal. It lay empty, mouth damp, a dark ring like a lip mark on glass. She swallowed. Her throat drew in, a fine tendon standing under the skin. No gulp, just a small shift in her neck. I wiped the canteen mouth on my pants. The cloth took the wet, leaving a half-circle stain that faded under the sun's burn. Far off, hoofbeats. Not near, not from his direction. 4 beats, then gone. A small dust puff rose and dropped like a fish. I didn't turn. I let my ears measure the distance. That sound had nothing to do with this. It passed. I set the canteen on the sand, mouth up, body tilted, the dent against the ground. The brass was hot, throwing a dull yellow sheen. She looked at the dent. It was pressed like a fingertip into tin foil. I set my hand on her knee, not pressing, just as a stone sits on a tin roof to keep it from lifting in wind. She didn't pull back. Her fingers on the knife eased, then tightened again. The crack in the handle was darker now with fresh sweat. I tore a strip of cloth from the leather bag at my saddle, 3 fingers wide. Old cloth, pliers long ago. The canteen hung tilted, mouth toward her like an open eye. I stood. The sand sank under my heel, a soft hitching sound. I slid my hand under her shoulder. The skin beneath the thin shirt was cooler than the sand. Sweat made the fabric cling. My other arm went under her knees. The swollen calf pressed my wrist, warm, soft. The knife was still in her hand. I felt the steel's cold near my side. I didn't take it. She shifted the angle down a little, said nothing. I rose, lifting her. Her weight was uneven, the bitten leg heavier, as if holding a small sack of sand. She exhaled. Not a cry, just air leaving a short refuge. I stood straight, her face level with my chin. Her eyes didn't meet mine. They looked past my shoulder to where no tracks remained. The horse stepped its front feet closer, as if choosing its place. I turned, back straight, and set her on the saddle. The heat of the leather sank through her shirt. I settled her sideways first, then straight, her back against the horn. Her head touched the leather edge, bounced, then found the hollow between 2 stitches. The black thread rose in twin ridges, pressing her nape. She shivered once, small. Her knife hand rested on her thigh, blade tip angled out, away from the horse. I laid my hand on her wrist, felt the tendon's firmness. Steady enough, not shaking. I pulled the stirrup strap down so her foot could find it. Her bare foot stepped on, slipped, then found place. The heel touched the black leather edge, left a brown dust mark. I tightened the girth, pulling one more hole. The buckle clicked. The horse shifted its weight. I placed my hand on its mane, salt crusted there. Its breathing slowed, accepting a second rider. She stayed still, chin lowered to shade the pulse at her neck. Her hair was tangled, strands stuck with sand grit, others with sweat, glinting like fine copper in the sun. On her left cheek, a dried salt line cut across a patch of dust. Her lips were closed, the trace of water still bright at the edge. I stepped to the front, checked the hat hung by its braided straw loop, the fibers lifting with a faint rustle. The blood stain on the brim faced inward, seen by nothing but the saddle. A fine layer of wind rose. Sand chased itself around my ankles. I held the reins, slack at first, letting the horse choose a way clear of thistles. It took a step. The hoof pressed down, flinging up black grains mixed with gold. I set my boot in the other stirrup and mounted. The saddle groaned low, like old wood taking back a familiar weight. She spoke again, softer. Let him go. Not a plea, not an order. A sentence set down like placing a light object on a table for someone to see it's there. I put my hand on the reins, looked toward the road the wind had just reshaped. Didn't answer, just nodded once, too small for anyone but me to notice. I turned the horse half around, its back to shield her from the wind. The brass canteen at my hip swung, mouth dry now, rim ringed with salt. The smell of hot brass folded into the smell of the leather saddle. The dent brushed my shirt with a dull knock. I held both ends of the reins, felt the old hemp scrape my fingers. Our shadows merged on the sand, stretching, shortening with the slope no one noticed. The sun moved a dust mote along the edge of the bright cone. No one spoke again. The horse began to walk. The wind shifted, carrying the dry scent of thistle, then taking it away. I looked straight ahead, kept its pace. The knife stayed in her hand, and the canteen no longer struck as we left that patch of sand. The wind behind us smoothed what was left. Only the small rolling mark of a stone I'd kicked remained. 3 turns, then still. By the third day, the porch's shadow had shortened and lengthened by a finger's width. The wind had shifted twice. The cloth at her ankle was dry at the edge, still warm underneath. The horse, used to a second scent, breathed slow. I rinsed the tin bowl at the trough, the water cloudy with salt streaks, hung the bowl on a nail, just beside the old rust mark. On the porch floor, wind-blown sand had piled into a low ridge against the sill, like a frozen stream. He came back while I still held the damp cloth. No warning sound, just a shift. Porch, thin as thread. The horse in the pen flicked an ear, then nothing. She sat in the porch's shadow, back to the post. Her bandaged foot was stretched out, still a little swollen, purple faded as if washed, chin resting near the collar. Her hair, tangled, swept over her shoulder, with strands crusted in white salt. Her right hand rested on the knife handle. Her thumb traced the old crack, blackened, dust caught in it, running like a pulled thread. Each pass made the wood sound faintly, like chipped glass touching a rim. She looked at it. Her eyes didn't go elsewhere. I stood on the porch step, one foot in, one out. My shadow reached the square stone set to keep from sinking. Didn't reach him. The fence stood between. The heat shimmer in the gap wavered like water. He looked toward the porch, but not into anyone's eyes. His gaze skimmed the post, stopped at a nail, slid over the tin bowl on its hook, brushed the line of her hair, then went back to the canteen. His nail tapped again. One. Stop. He breathed through his nose, leaving a speck of dust at the edge. I heard a fly touch wood, its wings hum once, then still. Dry grass outside the pen leaned together. His shirt brushed leather at his belt. Everything sat where it belonged. He spoke first. One word. Water? The voice was rough, the tongue not pushing the sound full, like testing if the word still worked. I didn't answer. I looked at her wrist. Her thumb still moved over the crack. Slower. A small cloud crossed the sun, stretching the porch's shadow by a hand's length, then pulling it back. The wind stopped for one count. The smell of dry earth rose, like old rope when heated. A cricket under the porch fell silent, then called again, missing a beat. He shifted his weight. His boot toe slid a fraction in the dust, left a dull mark, then stilled. He didn't step in. His finger tapped once more, quicker. I saw his left hand, near his stomach, reach to the breast pocket without thinking. Nothing there. It fell. She breathed longer, then cut it off. Her chin lifted a finger's height, as it didn't block it. Only breathed quick once, then held still. I gripped the canteen's body, felt the heat of brass through my skin. Sweat from his hand had dried there to a pale salt. The smell of old metal rose, clung to me. I lifted it from the strap. The leather loop slipped with a short tick, not enough to startle a bird. He watched the motion. His throat swallowed dry. The lump rose and fell. On his neck, a pale band where a scarf had been. I turned, walked back to the porch. The canteen swung in my hand, shifting weight, striking my leg twice, then stopping. She didn't move. The post's shadow passed over her face, drawing a gray line on her cheek, then pulling away. Her thumb stayed on the crack, back and forth. My own breath had lengthened, deepened. No one spoke. The old nail on the porch post sat level with her eyes. Its head was flattened, paint peeled, edged with a rim of brown rust. A past rain had left a streak below it, dried into a tendon-thin line. I lifted the canteen, tested the strap loop against the nail. The loop was stiff as horn, split once at the edge and pressed smooth again by someone's hand. It slid over the nail halfway, stopped. I turned my wrist with the leather grain. The loop gave a tiny shift. The canteen settled on the nail. Its mouth faced her directly. The dent showed clear. A pale salt ring circled the lip like a faded band. The cork sat tight, not loose. The canteen swayed once in the wind, tapped the wood, made a small, dull knock like a drop falling into the back of a spoon, then gone. I let go. The metal held its own weight. My hand still tingled with the heat of brass. I wiped it on my pants lightly. The salt left a faint shadowed mark in the cloth. I stepped back half a pace. The space between us enough for her to look over if she wanted, but she didn't. Her eyes stayed on her hand. The thumb was still, resting on the crack. The crack took nothing more. A black fly landed nearby, walked a few steps, lifted away. Beyond the fence, he stood as before. His shoulders had sunk a notch. His mouth opened, then closed. He swallowed dry at porch. Her breath deepened for a moment, then thinned again. Her hand left the knife handle a little, not quite releasing it. Her thumb no longer traced the crack, only rested there as if setting a stone against wind. Her eyes did not go to the nail nor to him. They stayed in the empty space between, where nothing stood. He stepped back just short. Dust under his heel broke like foam. He turned half into the wind, face angled. The sun cut into his cheekbone, showing a hollow. A long, loose thread at his collar lifted once, then stuck back. He set his foot in the print he'd left before, fitting it exactly. I said nothing. I kept my hand on the rail, the dry grain feeling like bone. The tin bowl beside it rattled once in the wind, gave a hollow ring. The canteen on the nail made no sound now. It stood, mouth toward the porch, shadow drawn to the length of a fingertip. He turned his back. Not fast, not slow. His shoulders tucked under the shirt. Between the blades was an old sweat mark shaped like a leaf, darkened again. He walked straight, along the fence to the corner post. He didn't reach for the wood once. At the last post he paused half a beat, as if to hear what might be behind him. Nothing but wind. He went on. On the porch, she laid her other hand on her thigh. Her fingers touched the edge of the thin blanket I'd left. The fabric folded into a small crease, sat like a kept mark. Her eyes stayed on the open space ahead where no one stood. At her neck the pulse staggered, skipped a beat, then steadied. The cricket under the porch changed tune even now. The sun's scent retreated behind the wall. I stepped onto the porch, looked at the nail. Its head rusted, a dried brown bead clinging to the wood. The canteen hung still, heavy but unmoving like a metal leaf. The dent threw back a strip of gray porch shade, warped at the edge. The cork was tight, the salt rim still at the mouth. I brought my hand close, then drew it away, letting the brass smell carry on its own. In the distance, dust on the road dropped layer by layer. His footprints doubled, then overlapped, merging into a pale track. The wind cut half of it away. Foot touched the ground as if testing cold stone. A short round of the yard. The left print firm, the right light and hollow in the middle. Her shoulders no longer leaned to the post. Her arms hung at her sides, not seeking the wall. The horse pushed its head through the pen rail, blew a thin white breath. It caught the sun and vanished. It watched her half around, then stopped. Dust gathered in its nostrils. I swept loose hay into a heap against the wall, my hands catching stray stalks. The sound was like old paper. She passed near, tilted her head, said nothing. Her eyes slid over the canteen, then down again. She made another round, each longer by a brick's length. When she passed the nail, her eyes stayed for one beat. The canteen's mouth faced the house. She didn't touch it, walked on. The sun rose another finger width on the post. That afternoon was hot, the porch's shadow too short to cover. I dragged the wooden trough into the light, poured in the rest of the bucket. The water rocked, carrying pale dust and damp wood scent. She took the canteen down. No word. Held the brass in both hands like something unwelcome but necessary. The dent fit into her right palm. The strap loop slid over her knuckle, left a dark mark. She pulled the cork. The fiber gave a small sound, not a pop, but a tired breath through teeth. I stayed half a step off. She tipped the canteen to the trough. The old water from other times slipped out in murky patches, broke into threads. She filled it, rinsed the mouth. The salt ring loosened like dust. Inside, a thin scale lifted and spun like fish skin. She scrubbed the rim with her thumb, nails sliding against brass in a soft scrape. The dent showed sharper when wet, sunken like a finger pressed in before the hand had strength. She looked at it longer than a breath, then went on rinsing. The water cleared from gray to pale. Foam faded and died. She shook the canteen twice, the hollow sound holding a moment, caught in the metal like an echo reluctant to leave. She dried it with her outer hem, pressing the cloth to the lip until no water stayed. The fabric left a faint crosswise print. She stepped into the porch, hung it back on the old nail. This time the mouth cloth touched sweat, left a damp patch that dried at once. The wooden-handled knife lay on the step, point toward the yard. The handle was polished smooth, the old crack darkened into a bright seam. I passed, my boot tip not touching the blade. After a time she picked it up to cut open a sack of nails. The edge went through the burlap in one clean scrape, no threads pulled. She folded the knife, set it back on the step, point toward the porch. A half-hand's length from its place before, enough to clear the path. Dry grass whispered together in the sun. The horse stood still, its tail drumming against its flank. I looked at the nail where the canteen hung, checked with my eyes. The loop was still set. The mouth still faced the house. I worked pine resin into the board's edge. The resin's scent rose thick and harsh sweet, pushing the dust away. She breathed in once, set her palm on the new surface as if testing its warmth. Her eyes stayed on where her hand rested. Her mouth was a straight line, nothing more. Afternoon wind. 2 bundles of dry grass leaned against the wall. The outer stalks sprung loose, curling around their own shadows. I lifted one bundle, tied it with an old hemp cord. The cord bit into the grass with a sound like shoes walking on salt. The empty canteen hung beside the bundle. From the post, an arm could reach it if one wanted. No one did. Wind pushed through the half-open stall door, past the canteen's mouth, touched the wood edge. A faint sound, like a fingernail tapping a spoon. Not a strong wind, just the right angle. Once, then silence, then again. She sat on the porch step, her bandaged foot set sideways. Her hand worked a dirt speck on the blanket with her fingertip, fading it. Her eyes found the canteen only when it sounded. Each time, her finger stopped for a beat, then went on. I stacked the leftover boards, edges aligned, their ends flush with the porch. The rings on each cut end showed seasons that could be counted. One had a crooked cut. I turned it inward. The sun withdrew. The nail's head cooled. The canteen no longer caught the light, only a smooth, dark shape. The wind knew its weight. The blade was colder than the air. She came out, not limping outright, but her left step was still shorter by half a finger. She stood under the nail, glanced at the canteen for a beat. Her right hand rose without hesitation. The middle finger touched the strap loop, testing its hold. Her left took the knife from me, light as accepting a sewing needle. She hung the knife beside the canteen. The sheath's old leather loop fit over the other nail, its backing darkened by sweat. The blade sat in its case, point down. The 2 objects hung parallel, not touching. The space between them was the width of 2 fingertips pressed together. She adjusted once. Small. The left object lowered by half a knuckle. The right raised the same. I watched. The alignment made the wall look flatter. The sun struck them for a while, then stopped. Their shadows fell, licking over the edge of the new board. I slid the door bolt. It set into its notch with a snug sound. The horse exhaled long. In the yard, dust lifted when a small bird flapped, then settled. She stayed 1 beat longer. Her hand touched the knife sheath, as if making a last check, then let go. No quick breath, no turning back. I heard her shirt brush the post as she stepped into the porch. The two objects stayed on the wall, still, parallel. The canteen's mouth still toward the house, the knife handle quiet in its sheath. Wind slipped through the door crack, barely enough to stir anything, just enough to spread the faint scent of pine resin from the new board. A dry leaf fell from the grass bundle, slid past the shadows of the two objects, stopped at the wall's base. The fall made a sound so slight, it disappeared as I reached to turn down the oil lamp that had burned dim all afternoon. No one spoke. No need. Only the door bolt and the wall's warmth keeping those two weights steady through the first night of the new season. The first rain came before anyone called it. The first drop landed on the canteen's mouth, sat at the lip, tight as a minnow's eye. Then a second, then a third. The pale salt ring melted slow, its white edge crumbling to powder. I stood under the thought, tightened, trembled slightly. A faint air thread showed on its surface, like a stitch mark. Then it broke. The sound on the brass was small. Closer was the frog at the ditch bank, calling one low note, then silence. On the ground, the water traced the old crack in the paving. The porch tile darkened slowly. The chipped corner drew in water fastest, the dark edge blooming like a leaf. Beside it, my boots leaned, their mouths catching rain. The hollow inside changed tone each time the wind slanted the curtain of water. She pulled the scarf tight to her neck. Its edge stuck to her chin, leaving a dark mark. Her eyes never left the canteen. Her lashes wet, beads of water waiting for a blink that didn't come. A few strands stuck to her temple, lying parallel like old hemp cords hung in rain. The rain rose a notch. Drops hit the canteen mouth in a chain, no longer spaced. One splash sent a small bead onto her nose. She didn't wipe it. On the brass, new spots planted themselves in old ones, making a map no one would read. I closed the door part way to keep the wind from driving through. The hinge rasped softly, like a stifled cough. Gray light crowded inside. The canteen's shadow stump shortened. The knife beside it didn't stir. The sheath drank water, the leather darkening. She still didn't take it down. Her hand was tucked under her coat edge, her thumb hooked at a loose hem thread. She pulled without breaking it. The thread stayed, like the rust line, like the raindrop, each with its own time. She stepped back half a pace to miss the spray, her eyes still fixed. The rain eased, not gone, just thin. The canteen's mouth held two last drops, side by side, each reflecting a warped patch of gray sky. One fell first. The other stayed a moment more, slackened, then let go. The sound vanished behind the wind's draw through the door crack. She turned inside, scarf still close at her shoulders, didn't look back. The next afternoon, the porch dried, leaving a thin salt line like chalk around the nail hole. I saw her sitting on the step, back straight, her bare feet set out to dry, the back surface dotted with rain pits. On her forefinger's joint, a thin scratch had dried, catching pale light. She drew her hand back, rubbed the mark with her thumb, then stopped. I stood in the doorway. The frame held the shape of a person like a wooden mold. My shirt bore a damp mark from brushing the eaves. The pine resin on my hands had lost its scent, only the stickiness remained. I didn't speak of replacing the plank. I looked where her gaze was set. The fence held no one back and welcomed no one home. On the path, in the low ground, a little water lingered. Its surface quivered once like chilled skin, then stilled. At the far end, old boot prints filled by rain were now small hollows, belonging to no one. She raised her hand part way. Her fingers touched the knife handle, then let go. The thumb paused at the old crack in the wood, worn smooth from many passes, now glossy. Her fingertip brushed it lightly, without pressure. A thin breath left her. She drew her hand back, set it again on the step, loose, fingers apart. In the stall, The horse shifted legs. Its hoof scraped the floor with 2 steady knocks, then stopped. It poked its head through the bars, looking at the sky above the fence, where the clouds had opened a line of light like a door's crack. I reached out. It touched its muzzle to the crossbeam, the scent of dry grass and leftover rain mingling. She shifted her weight. Her left shoulder lowered 1/2 centimeter. Her hem brushed the wood, leaving a fleeting sheen that faded. She stared longer into the gap between the farthest posts. No one approached. The wind changed. A strand of hair moved across her forehead. She didn't move it. I heard the sound of water dripping in the kitchen, caught in a tin bowl beneath an unpatched leak. The sound was regular, like a fingertip tapping a chipped porcelain cup. I counted the space between drops. Not even, now close, now far, still enough to hear. She drew back her right leg, rubbed her left ankle over the bandage. Not from pain, only the habit of finding familiar skin beneath the wrap. The bandage was stiff at the edges, soft in the middle. The tie mark still pressed in. She at once, leaving a ring of silence like after a faraway bell. I stood 3 paces off, eyes used to the dark. On the post, at the nail's head, a drop from the last rain caught a bit of light from the kitchen oil lamp, flared, then went out. The 2 shadows overlapped for a moment, then split. The wind shifted, then stopped, as if swallowing the words it had meant to say. She sat still, her hands clasped without force. The thumb of her right hand rested at the middle joint, near an old callus. Her face no longer turned to the wall or the fence, but to the slit between the 2 shadows. Not smiling, not frowning. Her eyelids lowered a notch against the lamp's light, but didn't close. In the kitchen, the fire under the pot sank, gave a small crack. The lid shifted barely, letting steam slip sideways. The scent of fried onion faded. The smell of damp wood grew. The smell of brass stayed the same. In the yard, wet grass lay flat, the tips holding bright drops. A cricket tried to call. Another answered, off key. Then both stopped, as if they knew their work was no longer for this hour. The fence stayed straight, the wire silent. The wind returned. Canteen and knife stirred, this time lighter. They touched with a sound thinner than before. No one explained. No need. The nail held fast. The loop gripped tight. The sheath did not shift. I rested my hand on the doorframe. The wood was cold. My pulse slowed to match the house's quiet. I watched long enough to be sure both objects stood straight. A slight tilt to the left one, noticed at noon, was gone now. Maybe the wind. Maybe a hand had straightened it when I wasn't looking. I didn't ask. She rose without sound. Her shadow pulled free of the porches, crossed the wall, brushed lightly against the canteen's shadow, and passed. Her hem touched the wood with the sound of paper being set down. She went into the kitchen, turned the fire lower, sealed the pot lid, then came back to the porch. We stood side by side, not close. The wind crossed again, this time only enough to stir the knife. Breathed out slow. The fire in the kitchen died completely, leaving one last crack. We went inside when it was dark enough not to see the rust streak. The door closed. The latch set into its notch with a snug sound. Beyond the wall, the wind withdrew like a sated animal. The 2 objects stayed on the wall, parallel. Their shadows merged into the wood. No one spoke. No one needed more. Outside, the fence was empty. Inside, the canteen's mouth still faced the house, and the thin sound from before lay somewhere in the air, not echoing, not gone. Night settled. The 2 objects on the wall said nothing. The canteen's mouth still toward the house, the knife handle still, the space between them still 2 fingers' width. The wind passed, then stood still, like one who knew its work. Some things need no verdict shouted aloud, only to be hung where the light can reach them. So rust shows itself, the dent admits its truth, and the crack in the knife handle grows smooth from a hand no longer shaking. By morning the stride was longer than a brick's length. The water inside was enough to boil a small pot, enough for that day. If any detail stays with you, the salt ring around the canteen's mouth, the soft clink when wind touched it, or the space between two things that never met, keep it as you would keep silence, so another can breathe.